that you had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. We had a great weekend here. And of course, Saturday out soul winning, and then Sunday, what a great day God gave us on Sunday. Just a phenomenal day with people saved and baptized, and great attendance really for Memorial Day weekend. I was shocked. And but God gave us visitors, God gave us souls and people baptized and people joining the church. That's always a good thing. I enjoy all of that. Then yesterday we were able to have a church picnic, as we always do on Memorial Day, and got to spend some time with people, and volleyball and cornhole, and then we had a frisbee golf tournament, and just and then hamburgers and hot dogs, and just good times celebrating those. Just really remember, we took some time and stopped and just talked about those who gave their lives for our freedom. And boy, what a thankful day it was. And I'm glad about that. Now, summertime's here and we've got to keep going. Don't you stop now. This is not the time to stop. This is the time that we go forward. This is the time that we say, okay, I'm not going to stop. I got to, at summertime, we can't stop doing what we're doing. Stay in your rhythm, keep soul winning, be faithful to church. Let's keep our ministries going. Let's strive, let's work to do our best that we can, because that is what God wants us to do. Well, today I want to read to you from 1 Samuel chapter 3 and verse 6. It says, "And the Lord called yet again, Samuel. And Samuel rose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And he answered, I called not, my son, lie down again." Now, Israel was in dark times spiritually. It did not matter what Israel's economy was like. That does not determine. I think too many times we determine our nation by the economy. That's not it. It only mattered to Israel, only mattered the spiritual temperature of Israel. That's what really mattered. Spiritually, it seemed bleak for Israel. Eli, who was the spiritual leader of that nation, had become an old man. His boys were definitely not like him. Eli was a good man, but he did not control his boys, which led to spiritual compromise. And boy, that sounds a lot like today. A lot of good men that pastor the churches, and then their boys are worldly and compromisers, as could be. I could name several of them right now. Their boys think they're so smart, and they just need to shut up and listen to daddy and follow dad's advice instead of trying to push dad to compromise. But we'll leave that for another time. However, we see hope for Israel in a young boy named Samuel. We don't know Samuel's exact age at the point in the scriptures, but we do know that he was still a child. Samuel was asleep at night when God called him. Samuel had yet to have God speak to him, and he did not know the voice of God as yet. In fact, he thought that this voice was Eli calling him. He ran to Eli several times before Eli realized that God was calling this young boy. Eli told Samuel that the next time he heard this voice, that he was to say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. In this story is where I see hope for any nation, as long as four things happen. First, there is always hope for a nation as long as God is God. No nation is hopeless as long as God is still God. Nineveh was at the brink of destruction, but God was still able to save Nineveh. Israel was at the brink of apostasy, and yet God was able to bring Israel back to himself. As long as God is still God, there is hope for a nation. The hope of a nation is not in the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Libertarian Party, an independent party, or whatever. Or it's not, the hope of a nation is not in having a good economy. The hope of a nation is always God. I heard a preacher bragging about recently about it, how he prayed for the president, and in his prayer he says that the hope for a spiritual awakening was this guy who's running for president. Can I tell you, that's not the hope of America. And this preacher needs to wake up and realize what he's saying. The hope of America is God, my friend. And God is still there. And there's always hope that God can bring a nation back to him. I hear people talk, I hear preachers often say, well, we're in the Laodicean age and we're not going to see revival. That's hogwash. As long as God is still God, God can still bring a nation back to him. The first thing it takes is that God's still God, and God is still God. So there's a hope for any nation. Second, there's always hope for a nation as long as God still calls people into the ministry. The hope of Nineveh was not that God called, the hope of Nineveh was that God called Jonah. Even though Jonah was a backslidden man, God called him. The hope of Israel was that God called Samuel. Had God stopped calling people for these nations, they would have been destroyed. I believe with all my heart, God is still calling people into the ministry and to be a pastor, to be an assistant. I still believe that. Sadly, we have preachers who have made the call of God so spooky that those God is calling don't even recognize the call, because it's not that feel-good, feely type of thing that these preachers are trying to make it sound like. Years ago, I was talking to a preacher who has this kind of mentality that, well, you got to know you're called. I just asked him privately. I said, how do you know you're called? Well, I don't know. I said, exactly. I said, stop trying to say that. And if someone says they're called, then okay. Let's stop trying to talk people out of the ministry. We need people into the ministry. If God is calling people, that means that God still has mercy for that nation, that he will exercise it if somebody would just answer the call. Third, there's always hope for a nation when those called by God answer his call. Israel's hope of revival was ignited when Samuel answered God's call. There's always hope for any nation as long as people answer the call of God. My friend, God can call all day long, but unless people are willing to say, "Here am I," then we're not going to have hope for a nation. The answer to God's call is not to be a graphic artist or to be it's to be a full-time servant of the ministry. They say, and I don't know how much this is, but they say one of the main classes in most Bible colleges today is the graphic arts class, and people are taking that major in Bible colleges today. What a travesty. Can I tell you, graphics and video and media are not going to save this nation, and it's not going to save this world. We need some old-fashioned leather-lung preachers that'll get out there, follow the call of God. We've got to start churches everywhere across the nation. Get back to the storefronts. Stop trying to build the museums, and let's do something for God to save our nation. Oh, I do believe that most young people would answer the call of God if preachers would stop making it so difficult. Good night. If you ask most preachers, how do you know God called you? Well, I know. Well, how do you know? They can't tell you. I just know. There's no voice. It's just that call, that conviction that is on their heart. That's how you know. Fourth, there's always hope for a nation as long as those called obey their calling. Had Samuel answered the call but not obeyed it, Israel would still be in the same situation it was in before God called him. The hope of a nation is that people not only surrender to the call of God, but they follow through with this call. Your nation depends on you following through on the calling of God on your life. Whether you volunteered, and yes, I believe God accepts volunteers, or answered God's call to serve him full time, you're critical to your nation for the sake of your nation. Can I ask you, please follow through on that call? To me, I hear people say, well, you need to have all this money set aside. Whatever happened to faith? There's guys that just went out and started a church by faith. They had to work. They were bivocational, worked a job and started a church, and God built that church. And there's churches all over America that are running today because somebody had the faith just to step out. Didn't have a bunch of money like a lot of guys think that you need to have today. I know you have to be able to pay your bills. I get that, but there's an element of faith that we need. And I think we've lost that. We're losing our world because we don't believe God's still God. We're in the Laodicean age and that's hogwash. God's still God. Well, God's still called. I know that, but you got to have this. You just have to have this. You got to know you're called. If you have that conviction, you're called. Well, I just got to answer. I don't know about answer the call. I'm just a little nervous. Answer it, my friend. Stop trying to do everything else. Get your focus on do something that really matters in life, and then obey that call. The only hope is these four things right here. If we don't get this back into our churches today, I'm telling you, whatever nation you live in is in dire need. God's still calling, but we need people to answer it and obey that call. Would you be that one? Oh, how we need it. We need churches everywhere. Let's answer the call. Let's do what God tells us to do. Let's obey. And let's go get out there and start churches everywhere, winning people to Christ, getting them into our churches, training them, and sending them back out. That's the hope of any nation. Well, I hope this is a challenge to you today. Now, let's remember today, be good to everyone. Everyone's having a tough time. Have